Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Wodrago, State Specialist in Community and Economic Development with the University of Illinois Extension. We're happy to host the final webinar in our December series for the BEAD Challenge. For those of you returning, this gives you a chance to wrap your head around anything you may have missed in the first two webinars and ask additional questions. And for those of you who are new, folks who signed up this past week and are joining, you'll get to catch up today as we'll cover the overview of what was covered previously and more clarification on the process for the BEAD Challenge with information on preparations for what's to come in January. And I want to welcome back Devin Braunstein, Assistant Director for Broadband with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. And with her is Illinois Broadband Lab's Shubika Agarwal. We want to thank you both very much for your time you've put into the series, talking to the counties and communities across the state. And we're grateful for the additional time we get today to cover this important information and use your expertise to see how to best engage in order to foster proper levels of investment in broadband access across our Illinois localities. Without further delay, I'm going to pass it on to Devin for the program, and I look forward to helping more towards the end of the hour for a Q&A. Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you again for our final webinar of 2023. Hope everyone's gearing up for the holidays. So again, this is a BEAD Challenge Process webinar. It will recap some information from last time just to make sure we really have it driven home. We're also going to share some new resources and do a little deep dive on one element of the challenge process called the Area Challenge. So like I mentioned, we'll do some recap, terms, process, sort of what's happening, where we are now, share some new and upcoming resources, walk through the Area Challenge, go over next steps, and then do a Q&A session, including some questions and answers that we clarified last time. So we'll have a chance to review those. Objectives for today. After this webinar, participants will know what the BEAD Challenge process is, why it's important, and how it may impact local communities, be familiar with current and up-and-coming resources, understand the concept of an area challenge, and know where to go for information and updates. So again, these next couple of slides may look familiar to many of you. And if you are new to this group, these are kind of our baselining slides on just kind of level setting on where we're at. So this is the high-level overview of the BEAD process. BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, will fund broadband infrastructure to make sure that everywhere in Illinois has a quality high-speed internet connection. What's been done already? Earlier this fall, there was a 5-year plan that the state submitted. It was reviewed and approved by the federal government. Then the next phase that we're in right now is initial proposal volume 1 and volume 2. So the state submitted volume 1, which basically is a document that describes what the challenge process will look like, who can participate, how we'll review challenges, and then how we'll take all of that information to finalize that ultimate map, which will determine funding eligibility. Volume 2 is currently in process. We're incorporating public feedback, and this is a much bigger document, and what it does is it describes the grant process overall. So how the state will sort of model its grant process, how it will solicit proposals, break up the state, and go forward with covering each of those areas with dollars to close the digital divide. Then, of course, what we're all here to talk about is the challenge process. So once volume 1 and volume 2 are approved by the federal government, the department called NTIA, will kick off the challenge process. And the first thing that will happen, which I'll get into, is you'll be able to look at a map, an interactive online map, check out which locations are currently marked as eligible or ineligible for funding, click on a location or several locations, and then initiate your challenge from there. So we're looking at roughly early January to be able to play around with that map, mid-January for the challenge process to open, and then the process will be open for at least 15 days, but the exact timing, again, will depend on that federal approval. Then the state will look at all of the responses that we got, adjudicate them, kind of organize the data, Service providers will have an opportunity to submit rebuttals if they believe that a challenge, they may actually provide service in an area. And then finally, we'll open up our subgrantee selection process. And so within 1 calendar year, we'll need to select all of our subgrantees to fill in all of those pieces of the map that are currently eligible for funding. So here are key terms and definitions. I feel like we should all just print this out and kind of hang it on the wall. But I'm going to go through this, one more time. So broadband serviceable location, a BSL. This is any location that is a business or a residential location where broadband service is available or can be installed. So when that map goes live, everything that you see on there will either be a BSL or a community anchor institution. So a BSL is just a term that the FCC uses and kind of labels locations as such in their data set. Then we have the 3 categories of how locations have or don't have broadband, which will influence how they're prioritized in the BEAD funding process. Unserved, this is a location that does not have access to any broadband. So meaning they do not have speeds of 25/3 megabits per second. So maybe they have something less than that, or they have no broadband at all. Those locations will be considered unserved. And this is the top priority for funding. Underserved are locations that may have access to that basic speed of 25/3, but they don't have access to that higher tier of speed, 100/20 megabits per second. Another way that a location can be considered underserved is latency is greater than 100 milliseconds. And basically, when you take a speed test, you'll also be able to see your latency. If it's over 100, there's an opportunity to submit it to the challenge portal. If a location is served, it means that it has broadband speeds available of 100/20 megabits per second or more. It doesn't mean that that location currently subscribes to it, but it is available. It is possible for that location to subscribe to 100/20 megabits per second. A community anchor institution, or a CAI, is an institution that provides critical services and support to residents, particularly those in underrepresented communities. A multi-dwelling unit, or an MDU, is a building with at least 2 housing units, so basically an apartment building. And we're actually going to dig into this piece a bit more today. Finally, latency, I mentioned it. What this means is it's the time it takes data to go back to a server and then back to your connection. Basically, you don't want high latency. If you have high latency, it could cause your video meetings to be choppy or freeze. So you're really looking at latency 100 milliseconds or lower is good. All right, so a couple more recap slides here on the BEAD challenge process. We have $1.4 billion to connect all of these unserved, underserved, and eligible CAI locations over the next 5 years. We're going to prioritize using fiber wherever possible, look at both the unserved and underserved locations, as well as community anchor institutions and multi-dwelling units where there may not be that adequate connection in certain units. We'll go through our subgrantee selection process in 1 year, and also require some sort of low-cost option and middle-class affordability option. And just to recap kind of how we got here, so the federal government developed a broadband map, but coverage in some areas may be overstated. So this challenge process is our opportunity to make sure that the map is accurate, which is important because this is tied to funding opportunities. And we want to maximize funding going to the places where it is needed most. And the reason why this is a public process is because you know the most. You're on the ground, you're in your communities, you're living in your homes, you're providing service to residents. So we encourage everyone's participation. And for any ISPs who may be on the call, we're working with folks who may have received state and federal funding for broadband deployment to accurately represent those locations as enforceable commitments on the BEAD challenge map. So look out for any correspondence from us if there are final things we need to confirm, And just know that those commitments will be reflected on the BEAD Challenge map that is published in January. Just to recap here, I think the big thing is who can submit challenges. So units of local government, nonprofits, and internet service providers can directly submit them, but individuals can participate by way of those other organizations. So we have a speed test tool that will highlight, or folks can work with a nonprofit or government partner to submit their challenge. Anything available on that map can be challenged. And again, challenge process, we're looking at sometime in mid-January. So right now we're in the pre-registration phase. Then everything will be published in January. The process will open. We'll have 3 weeks after the challenge notification to accept rebuttals. Then the state will adjudicate, so kind of make sure everything matches up, make final decisions, and then publish that final map in late spring of 2024. Another quick recap here, but Shabika will really go into this, is that we are doing some pre-challenge modifications. So basically, if there are areas that based on their technology or based on things that we know about those areas, give us information that make it seem like those areas are not actually served with quality broadband, they will already be reflected as such on the broadband map. So locations that are served with DSL technology, which is legacy phone line technology, will be considered underserved. And then certain multi-dwelling unit buildings will be considered unserved if there is evidence that there is not service in the majority of those units. So where are we now? We're still in step 1, pre-registration, and we'll give you the link in a moment. We have lots of folks pre-registered, which is really exciting. This is required to participate. Then you'll be able to view this map in early January and select a location or multiple locations, and finally submit your challenge. So when you select a location, you'll be able to click Add a Challenge, and then go through the steps that will take you to the portal to upload your evidence and hit submit. So quick recap on pre-registration, and then we're moving on to new content. Pre-registration is available now, and it is required to participate in the challenge process. You can pre-register if you are an eligible entity, so a nonprofit, a government entity, or an internet service provider. And you can pre-register if you're an individual. And this is important for 2 reasons. One, you'll get up-to-date communications on resources about the challenge process when it opens, important dates, and then identity verification. So the challenge process is a tight window, and so we want to make it as seamless and efficient as possible. So it will be very helpful to be able to verify who you are, that you are eligible to submit this challenge all ahead of time. So once the challenge window opens, we can sort of move quickly, full steam ahead. It's super easy, just a form that asks for your information. And if you have pre-registered already, we just cleaned up that data, so we'll be sending you a confirmation email likely tomorrow to just let you know that you are in the system and pre-registered. All right, new and upcoming resources. So we have launched a BEAD Challenge Process landing page. That's a fancy term for a web page, but everything consolidated in one place. So dceo.illinois.gov/BEAD Challenge, star it, bookmark it. This is the place where we're kind of dumping all of the resources, past webinars, various documents that are helpful here. And this is where the links to the challenge map and the challenge portal will be stored, plus opportunities to sign up for future webinars. So if you were to save one page, this is the one. Next. So as we mentioned, individuals are able to participate in the process through local nonprofits or through local governments. But we understand that most individuals are probably not, hearing about the challenge process all the time. They may not know how to take a speed test or kind of what all of this means. So we are excited to train hopefully many of you to then train folks in your community and support them as they participate in the challenge process, should they have a challenge that they want to submit. So mark your calendars. We're offering 2 separate trainings. They'll be the same content, but just 2 different dates, January 4th at 2 p.m. and January 5th at noon. We're looking at targeting nonprofits, community-based organizations, housing authorities, affordable housing, local governments, really any organization who has a trusted, close relationship with community. We want to sort of meet with you to share more about how you can engage your community members. So what will happen in this meeting, we'll be sharing a toolkit so you can share out on social media, some how-to flyers, basically just giving you what you need to support individuals who are interested in participating. And then it will also be a space for you to answer questions specific to how can individuals participate through my nonprofit or through my other eligible entity. And like I mentioned here, we'll be sharing a community outreach toolkit with some nice like branded social media graphics, and then one-pagers that you can print, you can share out and whatnot. So the registration link is live. It'll be linked in the slides, but we'll also make sure that you get it in an email. Also coming in January, we are really close to finishing up finalizing this challenge portal map, or this, excuse me, challenge map, which is the screenshot that you see in the middle here on step 2. So look out for in early January a webinar, which will be a walkthrough kind of demonstration of how to use this map, and we can answer all your questions. Following that, we'll have a full demo plus detailed documentation on how to go through the entire process of identifying an area on the map and then going to the portal, uploading your evidence, and submitting that challenge. So I know folks are anxiously awaiting these. We're really excited to be able to share them. So again, targeting early January for those demos. And now I will pass it on to Shubika to go into more detail about the area and MDU challenge.
Sure. Thanks, Devin. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. So I think last week in the Tuesday webinar, we basically shared a little bit more on the evidence side of things for the different challenge types. We're still going to briefly cover that in the next section, but with the section really focusing on the area and MDU challenge, the intention is essentially familiarizing you with, how this really works. And as a local unit of government or nonprofit who's going to be working with individuals in your community, really how you can start to work on some of these challenges, and realizing that the challenge process is going to be like 2 to 3 weeks long. We want you to optimally use your time and resources. So this can actually help with some of that. So firstly, talking about the area challenge. So this is essentially an area here is a census block group. So with this, if there's 6 or more broadband serviceable locations with a particular technology and a single provider that are challenged, then the onus for sharing that there's service available at this location on the reported speeds and latency and technology, that really shifts to the internet service provider at that location. So they're supposed to be sharing evidence that they serve all the locations in that particular census block group. So in the screenshot here, we basically have an example of a census block group in the Chicago area. So this is like block group 2, and we also have the track number there. So just to give you a sense of how you can think of this, again, this is a resource that's going to be coming in sometime early January. So what the different colors and symbols here really mean. So all the symbols that show up in red would essentially mean that these locations are ineligible for funding based on the data that's currently reported in the FCC availability data, and also based on any prior state or federal funding that these areas might have received. So all that in red that would show up on this map would be ineligible. And then we do have green locations as well, which are eligible based on the location, based on the data that we currently have for them. So if you are a local government or nonprofit who's kind of aware that this particular area might not really have the service that's reported, then what you could essentially do is just target 6 locations within that area to collect data, and you wouldn't have to submit that information for all locations in the census block group. And that just basically helps you to streamline efforts and not have to submit a lot of challenges if you see some of those widespread inaccuracies on the map. So that is about the area challenge. Again, if there are questions, please feel free to put them in the chat when we'll answer them towards the end of the presentation. The next type of challenge that we want to discuss is the MDU challenge. So the MDU, the multi-dwelling units. So again, the BEAD challenge map that we're going to be sharing is going to have all of these MDUs listed separately as well. So if you're an organization that would want to target your efforts on MDUs, and that's sort of, the locations or residents that you usually work with, you will have that option to filter out MDUs in your particular region. So I would like to direct your attention to this map on the right side here. We have all the MDUs in the state by unit count. So essentially, spread out all across the state. The ones in yellow, which are pretty light, they are the one with 2 to 16 units. And again, we've categorize them based on these requirements set up by NTIA. So if there is an MDU with less than 15 units, if one or more unit challenges a particular technology and provider, then it would shift again the onus on the provider to share that they provide service to all the units in that particular MDU. The second breakup is, and I'm sorry, the legend here is a little confusing, but it's 2 to 15 units, 16 to 24, and 25 and more. So if it's 16 to 24 units, 2 or more units challenging a particular provider and technology, that would be sufficient for an MDU challenge. And those are represented in green on the map here. And then for MDUs that have 25 or more units, if 3 or more challenge a service at that MDU, again, it's an MDU challenge, and those are represented in red on the map here. So essentially, a lot of, the bigger cities that we've heard of in all the counties across Illinois, starting off with a lot of MDUs in the Chicagoland area. Then we have a good concentration in the collar counties as well. So, these could be some target areas. If we look at some of the other northern counties that we have up here, so we have quite a few MDUs in Rockford, DeKalb, Rock Island. Moving a little bit to the central parts, we have Peoria, Pekin, Macomb, Galesburg. We have Normal and Bloomington here, which have a high concentration of these MDUs with more than 25 units. The Champaign-Urbana area, Decatur. Then we have Quincy, Jacksonville moving a little more down south. Then we have Taylorville, Mattoon, Charleston in the southeast. We also have Effingham right here. And then there's quite a few in the East St. Louis area. And then towards the southern portions, we really have Mount Vernon, Carbondale, Harrisburg, Centralia, Salem, and all of these different places. So there's definitely going to be more, you can zoom into the map, get into regions that you work with, and get a better understanding of where these MDUs are. And also it's going to reflect what the maps have to say. So based on the current data, if they are categorized as served, unserved, or underserved. So that would be, a really good step into getting a sense of how many people would you really want to challenge from those locations, so that it's not collecting all or engaging everybody from a census block group or from an MDU, but just really looking at some of these minimum thresholds that can be met and convert that into an area or MDU challenge. And that's how you can start to like streamline some of these efforts around collecting data from individuals in your communities. So in the next section, talking about next steps in Q&A. So how, as you're starting to like, think about this, reaching out to residents, we also wanted to share some information that you can start to collect. So for each of these types, for any challenge information there that you're collecting, firstly, the challenge type, and in the next slide, we'll just review the different challenge types again. The name of the provider, the technology, the address for the challenge, that's important. And if it's a multi-dwelling unit, that has like a unit number, again, that's going to be an important piece of information to collect. The location ID, which is assigned to every broadband serviceable location based on the FCC maps. So again, if you are an ISP or a local unit of government that already has access to the fabric, you should be able to like, identify the location ID. But if not, the BEAD Challenge map that we're creating, that will also give you the opportunity to like, type in addresses so that you can get the location ID. So if you don't have it already, this is one piece of information that you can get from the BEAD Challenge map that's going to be coming in early January. And then definitely the evidence file. And again, more details on what type of evidence has to be shared for the different challenge types that we shared in the webinar last week. But if we have any specific questions around that today, certainly happy to answer those towards the end of the presentation. So that's information that we need for all the different challenge types. But if there are availability, enforceable commitments, or planned service challenges, then we'll also need information on the advertised upload and download speeds. And we'll have templates, CSV templates coming out for each of these different challenge types so that it's easier for you to aggregate some of this data that you're collecting from individuals, and also like, ISPs or anybody who's participating in the challenge process, you're free to like use these templates. We'll have, again, when the portal is launched, we'll have more detailed webinars on how exactly would you be uploading these to the portal and make sure that it's all like, formatted in the right way and you're able to successfully submit those challenges. So there's going to be more information coming up on that in January. And then for specifically for speed and latency challenges, if you are a local unit of government or nonprofit, really, we would encourage you to direct residents to this website here, which is the beadchallenge.org. Again, we had demoed this in our webinar last week. This will essentially reduce your burden to collect that evidence for a 3-speed test on 3 separate days, and just record those speeds and get the median and all of that goes with speed and latency challenges. It's going to ease a lot of that evidence collection and aggregation on your end. So any resident who's interested in participating in the speed and latency challenges, the easiest way would be just to go onto this website. Again, the train the trainer sessions that we're hosting on 4th and 5th of January, that's going to have a more detailed sort of information on how somebody can engage in the speed test, and just make it easier also to like share about the speed test opportunity with your residents and in the community. So recapping the different challenge types. So we've kind of mentioned some of these in the slides before. So thought it would be helpful to again go through some of these. So it's basically divided into 3 different categories. Firstly, challenges for broadband serviceable locations. Then we have enforceable commitments or planned service, which is essentially if a location is not funded by a previous federal or state grant program, and if they have like recent plans on deploying technology to that particular area by June 30th, 2024. So those kind of challenges. And then we have CAI challenges as well. So again, CAIs have been super engaged in the entire process with us. So there's going to be an opportunity to again help correct the maps in terms of whether a location is or is not a CAI. And then you can also challenge the eligibility for a CAI to receive BEAD funding, and that would be through a speed test challenge. The eligibility slightly differs because a CAI would be considered eligible if they do not have access to gigabit symmetrical. But then we have the different unserved, served, and underserved definitions for all other broadband serviceable locations. So for those, we have the availability challenge. Firstly, if the provider and technology that's mentioned at that particular location, if that's not actually available at your location. The speed test challenge, if you're not receiving those speeds that are reported for that location, the latency, ensuring again that it is less than 100 milliseconds, but if that's more, then your location could be eligible for BEAD funding. And then there's data caps. So again, if there's unreasonable data caps at a particular location, I think we clarify that unreasonable is anything greater than 600 gigabytes, that is what is an unreasonable data cap. And then we have the technology. If the technology indicated for that location is incorrect, that can be challenged. And if they only provide business service at that particular location. So that's a recap of the different challenge types. In terms of next steps, again, we encourage you to participate and pre-register. We have a link, and we'll probably post that in the chat pretty soon as well. Pre-registrations open until January 12th. The speed test portal that we shared is currently live. So any resident who wants to engage in the speed test can do so right now. Again, it would be taking 3 speed tests on 3 separate days, and there are instructions on the beadchallenge.org website itself in terms of how you can, continue to take those speed tests. There's going to be more information on the map and the challenge portal coming up in January, so stay tuned for that. We mentioned the Train the Trainer programs that are happening on January 4th and 5th. There's also going to be a toolkit coming out that's going to just make it simple for people to get a sense of how they can participate in the speed test. So that's coming up. And Devin also shared the new landing page that we have, which is tceo.illinois.gov/BEAD Challenge. So that is where you can, again, find most updated information on anything related to the BEAD Challenge process. So I'm going to pass it on back to Devin to go through some of the questions that we had received in the previous webinar, and then we'll get to new questions that we have this time around.
Great, and we'll have lots of time for questions since we had a much shorter presentation today. So last time we promised to you that we would post all of the questions and answers from these webinars online for everyone's consumption. So that has been done. dceo.illinois.gov/BEAD Challenge is where you can find a PDF of some FAQs and then a label for the date of the webinar, questions and answers. So I think we have that for last week's webinar and then the previous week's webinar. So we'll continue to do that. So if you miss a webinar, you can, or you don't catch a response, you can look in the same place for that. I pulled out a couple of questions that may be like more broadly relevant to folks to just recap today. But again, the full Q&A is available online. So last week, one person asked about what would suitable evidence be or acceptable evidence be for lack of suitable infrastructure within a multi-dwelling unit. This is one of the pieces of evidence listed for challenging availability. So our recommendation is challenging for availability or for speed. And the most straightforward substantive evidence that you can provide shows that a provider does not offer the qualifying service to that unit. So this could be really one of two things. One, documentation that service was refused within the last 180 days, such as an email or a letter. Or two, a letter or email dated within the last year, 365 days, showing that a provider failed to schedule a service installation or offered an installation date within 10 business days of a request. So last time I think we talked about, can you submit photos of fiber not being on a certain pole or in a building, but really you would need to go into, well, is there fiber in the ground? Is it coming up through a different way? And so I think that like evidence of not being able to get service is going to be your easiest bet to demonstrating an availability challenge. Someone asked about, can we start gathering data on beadchallenge.org, which again is the public speed test. Anyone can take it, anyone can submit data. The answer is yes, you can start immediately. The speed test needs to happen within 60 days of the start of the challenge period. We are, pretty confident that we are within 60 days. So if this is starting in mid-January, you should be able to start taking it now, and to encourage any individuals to also take that speed test. For a speed test to be eligible as evidence of a challenge, we need 3 different speed tests taken on 3 separate days. And you'll just need to make sure to fill in the bottom part of the form, which you'll see on the website, with your name, zip code, address, and then the speeds that you currently subscribe to. So if you need help finding that, I think we're happy to help you offline. I don't see an existing service challenge type. How do you anticipate ISP challengers should handle new deployment that is not reflected on the map? So planned privately funded deployments that are not currently on the map can be challenged during the challenge process. There is a challenge category called planned service, or code P. And so if you can demonstrate that you will be building in a certain area, I think by June of 2024 it needs to be complete, then that is an eligible challenge to submit. We got a question 2 weeks ago: if my whole neighborhood appears as green on the map, which means that it is served or ineligible, does that mean that I can't participate in this process? So the answer is no, because the whole point of this process is, if you have a different lived experience than what you see on the map, this is your chance to correct it by providing evidence, whether that's a speed test or a letter or something else. Finally, so we have the pre-registration form, which is live right now. Is there a way to verify that I pre-registered? Email me. My email is on the slide if you would like to request a confirmation. But we also are, we have an updated list as of this afternoon of who has registered, and we'll be sending out emails to you just confirming that we have your information. So that's all we got today, but happy to rehash any of the other Q&As from last week, or we can just pause here and open it up for any new questions today. And Nancy, maybe I'll let you take us through the chat.
Thank you. So far, we have one question, a set of questions here from a participant needing more information. So this participant says that we're trying to do some work ahead of the challenge period. Does the current map, and it looks like when you took your slide down, it jumped over. Okay, just a second. Does the current map provide any relevant data? Can we use that data to target testing prior to the challenge period? And can you take a few minutes to review the data on the current map to ensure we know how to use, to ensure that we know how to know what areas may need to be challenged?
Right, and I just stopped sharing my screen so that I can actually go on to the Illinois Broadband Map and share some information that might be helpful. But before I do that, I also want to note that with this speed test challenge that we're sharing, it's essentially like, you can also push it out to everybody in your community who's interested in taking it. If, we don't want people to actually have to go onto the map and see if they are eligible or not to be able to participate. It's just open for anybody who thinks they're not receiving the speed that they are. So, the push can definitely be in, community-wide. But if there are certain areas that you might want to focus on, there is definitely some information on the Illinois Broadband Map that can be helpful. So, and I can post a link to the map in the chat after this. But when we log onto the map, the first layer that we see on there, broadband serviceable location status, based on the June 2023 FCC data and based on BEAD eligibility. So this essentially is, the map that we initially shared, which shows 187,000 unserved and 90,000 something underserved locations in the state. So looking at the legend here, the green locations would be considered served, the yellow would be underserved, and the red would be unserved. So, and I know, Pat, I think we're talking about Greene County here. So maybe let's just take that as an example for this. Yeah, so we can essentially go into our community and look at, based on the recent availability data that's shared, what do the maps say about my location? Would it be served, underserved, or unserved? Again, the caveat here is that this does not currently account for any prior federal or state funding. So that is something that's the additional piece of information that we're currently working on putting together. We'll have that ready in the BEAD Challenge map. But this could be a good starting point to look at, locations that are currently categorized as unserved and underserved. And if that does not match up with your understanding of service availability in your community, then those would be the areas to target for speed tests. And this might be a little bit of work, but if you do want to look at, commitments made in your specific area, we also do have information about ACAM. So like in the bottom tab here, federal, we have information about the different programs. So we have ACAM, CAF2, CAF1 and CAF2, and then we also have RDOF. So that basically highlights all the different areas that might be served through these different programs. Um, they might be different speeds and not all of them might meet BEAD eligibility for served. So again, there's got to be, a note of caution as you're using these data sets. So you'll have to look into the provider name and, what is the service that they're offering. But this could be helpful if you want to look into some of that. But I think just very basic, if you just want to get a sense of availability, just turning on that first layer is going to be helpful to target those areas, to keep it like plain and simple for everybody.
And just to recap, if there's a certain area or address that is green, meaning it's served, and you, in your experience, believe that it is not served, that you don't have access to that 100 over 20 megabits per second, that's exactly what you'd want to be targeting. If you're already considered underserved or unserved on this map, so yellow or red, you will be considered eligible for BEAD funding unless any of these updates that we're making for this challenge process specific map change that. And then just to share the relationship between this map and the map that we keep referring to that's coming in January, that map kind of builds off of this, but it adds a couple of things. It adds community anchor institutions, which are not on this map. So anything that was added as part of the public comment process this fall, so certain, community nonprofits, libraries, fire departments, those locations will be on the updated map, but I don't believe they're on this map. The new map will also be updated with what are called pre-challenge modifications. Essentially, if a building is covered using just DSL, it will be recategorized as unserved. And then similarly, if there are certain multi-dwelling units, they may be recategorized as underserved. So by the time that new map comes out in January, it'll be a little bit more precise, specific to the challenge process, and a little bit more comprehensive. But totally agree, should be good. This could be used as a resource right now. Just know that, there are certain things that won't be on there.
Thanks. I think that dovetails perfectly into this next question. we have here says, my area has broadband access, but I am a public library administrator and we are losing access to our affordable intergovernmental fiber internet line. As a community anchor institution, would we qualify as a BEAD participant?
So on the updated map, every community anchor institution, which likely includes your library location, will be considered as eligible or ineligible for funding based on its proximity to fiber or other sorts of technology that can provide gig symmetrical service. So that's over 1,000 megabits per second. So through our analysis, we may be able to see what you're experiencing. But if the map does not reflect that and the map says that your library location is not eligible for funding, that's an opportunity for you as the public library to submit a challenge on, I think it would be either availability or speed with the required evidence.
Thank you. Another question states, can you also cover the grant eligibility pages to explain what they add as well? So that might be a question for Shubika. Shubika, you'd quickly mentioned the different grant eligibility items there. You know, you had mentioned
Right.
RDOF and what, you know, you can explain a little bit what all of that means.
Sure. So, yeah, as I mentioned, there's information on the various federal programs on here. But again, there's need to be anybody looking at those has to have more information in terms of the different technology and the speeds that they'll be providing. Some of that is available in the pop-up boxes that come up when you click on these funded areas. But that's one resource that can be helpful for the federal commitments. I think they're also referring to the grant eligibility tab that we have on here, which has Connect Illinois grant eligibility. And this is a little different from the BEAD eligibility. So I wouldn't really recommend people to directly go on to this layer to see if their location would be eligible for BEAD funding. I would really just recommend going on to the Access tab and looking at this layer. So yeah, prior to federal and state commitments, it's the red and yellow that are eligible. And you can look at the federal funding sources here, but definitely do not recommend using the grant eligibility here because that is specific to Connect Illinois, and that might just cause some confusion in terms of what may or may not be eligible for BEAD. If we have follow-up questions on that, certainly happy to answer those.
Thanks, Shubika. Next question states, how would consultants or entities that are assisting providers with the challenge process get registered for access to the challenge map?
The challenge map is going to be accessible to everybody, whether or not you are pre-registered for the challenge process. So yes, if there are consultants working with providers or communities, or it's any member of the community can actually go onto the map and look up their location. So you wouldn't need you wouldn't have to go through any additional steps to get access to the map when that's released.
And you could also just register for the pre-registration. Sorry, you can pre-register for the challenge pre-registration form.
Yes, thank you. And it looks like we had a link to that in the chat. I can put that in there again. That will also be included in the follow-up email today. Want to give folks an opportunity to ask any other questions, which I don't see yet at this time, but want to ask Devin or Shubika if there's anything else that they believe they should cover for all the various entities today.
I think there was one question earlier on from Cheryl. If we have several companies, do we need to register each company or just one company? Cheryl, just to make sure I understand your question, are you saying that you like work for multiple companies that may have different locations? Or you want to maybe submit a challenge on behalf of different organizations? Maybe you can clarify.
Yeah, and let me make sure that folks can unmute themselves. We've
Sure.
had, yeah, we've had participants do that as well. You're not necessarily beholden to writing your questions in the chat. I believe now everyone has the functionality to unmute themselves if they would like to just unmute and ask a question directly.
All right, well, we'll make sure to write up a response for that. I think that the purpose of the pre-registration form is to and that you are eligible to challenge. And so I think you can challenge associated with just one of your organizations or companies. It just needs to be a nonprofit, an internet service provider, or a local government entity. And then I think you only need to pre-register once.
And we have another question. Asking if DSL technology will be judged as underserved.
Yes, based on the pre-challenge modification that we're incorporating, that's true. But we do know that there are certain, enforceable commitments in some of these DSL-only areas where the existing providers are trying to build and expand fiber services. So we're working with them to basically, finalize MOUs with the Illinois Office of Broadband that they're going to bring fiber service to these locations. So if that's happening, then they definitely would get, fiber service, or if that's not the case, they would be considered underserved and hence eligible for BEAD funding.
Thank you. Anything else either you, Devin, or Shubika wish to cover?
No, I think it's great to see people engaged in the process week after week. Hopefully everyone's an expert by now on this pretty complex topic. So continue to sign up for webinars in January, visit that landing page, look out for the train the trainer sessions, and don't hesitate to reach out to Shubika or I directly if you want to just chat one-on-one offline or have other questions. We're always happy to do that.
Thank you so much. Shubika, is there anything you'd like to add? I know we had a follow-up question asking clarification on what you had mentioned and if that applies to MDUs or any address.
Right. The DSL pre-modification applies to any DSL that's not specific to MDUs.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Devin and Shubika, for covering the material again for all of us and the additional clarification. We look forward to having you back on in January, and we're expecting to offer several more training style sessions and, similar today, additional webinars to help along the outreach and education necessary for the BEAD maps and investments to come around full force in 2024. So want to wish everyone a warm, safe, peaceful holiday, and we look forward to being a part of your education in 2024. We wish you the best for the new year as well. On behalf of U of I Extension, thank you so much for engaging with us, and thanks for all you do in your communities.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.